Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Samantha Leighanne and I talk about books. All right, so it is February, Valentine's, candy hearts, and women in horror. And that's what we're going to talk about today is women in horror. So if you were unfamiliar, February is Women in Horror Month, as well as Black History Month, but you should honestly be reading Black authors all year long. So, that's a thing. But today we are going to be highlighting some women in horror. Now, I will go ahead and say that I have not read all of these authors. However, they are all authors that I have on my list or that I own books of. So I will be either highlighting one of their books that I absolutely adored, or I will be talking about one book that I want to read by them. So this is a longer list, so let's just go ahead and get started. So one of the very first authors that I want to talk about is an author that I discovered last year, and that is Tananarive Due. Tananarive Due was an author that I actually first saw whenever I watched the Shudder documentary Horror Noir, which is absolutely amazing. If you haven't watched that, I'm going to need you to go ahead and do that. So all of that said, after I saw her speak and I found out she was an author, I was like, let me go ahead and grab one of her books. As you all know, the haunted house genre is one of my favorite genres, and so she actually has a haunted house book called The Good House. And I did read that last year and absolutely loved it. It is a great book. It is longer, slow burn quality, excellent character development, and really creepy vibes. She also has written many other books with varying subjects. She has written kind of a paranormal, almost an urban fantasy called the African Immortals series, which begins with My Soul to Keep. And I am 2 books into that, and I am really, really loving it. She's an incredibly talented writer. She's somebody that I could just listen to her talk all the time. 100%. She is an author that you need to pick up if you haven't picked her up. Do it, please. As stated, The Good House and My Soul to Keep are really good ones. I also have several other books of hers that I plan on getting to. One of them is Ghost Summer, which is a short story collection about ghosts, I'm assuming. And then I was also gifted The Between, which is, I am fairly certain, also a ghost story. I was gifted this by Kathy. So thank you again, Kathy. I am super, super excited to get to this because I hear that it is absolutely amazing. One of my other just all-time favorite horror authors in general is Ania Ahlborn. You guys have seen me talk about her on this channel so many times, so many times. That said, I have many books that I could recommend when it comes to her body of work. I think that I only have 3 left that I need to read. Maybe more than that. I'm not 100% sure, but regardless, I have really enjoyed almost everything that I have read from her. My 3 favorites so far being The Devil Crept In, Seed, which is a wild ride. I've recommended that on a couple of different lists, as well as The Shuddering. The Shuddering is going to make its way onto another list that I am planning, so don't worry about that. But one of the reasons that I love her writing so much is that she is incredibly atmospheric. She brings you into the setting that she is writing about, and you feel like you're there, and it can make for some really, really creepy scenes. There are several scenes in the books that I just mentioned and other ones that I haven't that have just stuck with me. For those of you who have read Ahlborn, no, I have not read Brother yet. I hear that that one is the best, so I am purposely saving that one for last because I feel like it's going to be so good, and I feel like it's going to be a really good note to end on. So I'm holding off on that one, but I plan on getting to it pretty soon. But I feel like Ahlborn is probably one of the more well-known horror writers, but if for some reason you haven't chosen to pick her up, I'm gonna need you to do that sooner versus later. So one of the other authors that I wanted to mention on this list is Daphne du Maurier. Now, it could be argued that she's not exactly horror. However, suspense is what she does. One of the skills that du Maurier has is that, du Maurier wrote a ghost story without actually having a ghost in it. Tell me that doesn't take skill. Also, just the atmosphere. Again, the atmosphere. Atmosphere is everything to me, in case you didn't realize that. Like, if your book doesn't have atmosphere, then I don't want it, okay? If you can't draw me in and make me feel like I'm there, then, like, what are you even doing? But I read Rebecca, and I also read My Cousin Rachel, and I really enjoyed both of them. Just her writing style is something else, especially for being a classic writer, but she writes suspense, and suspense is part of horror. And so that's why I chose to include her on this list. But yeah, Rebecca, even if you aren't a huge fan of like classics in general, I am also not a fan of classics, and I actually enjoyed it. So I would encourage you to pick it up if you haven't. A newer addition to this list would be Laurel Hightower. I had the pleasure of reading one of her books in the month of January, just a short novella called Crossroads, and wow, did it gut me. For someone who is not a mother and having the core of that story being about motherhood, she made me feel things. And that, my friends, is the mark of a good writer, as well as the fact is the end of that thoroughly fucked my world up. I still think about that ending, and that is skill. Like, serious skill. She also has, I believe it is a story collection, but I'm not 100% sure. It's called Whispers in the Dark, and I am really looking forward to at some point getting to that. But Crossroads was just such a good read, where if she is not a writer who is on your radar, I'm gonna need you to get on that too. Next, I want to talk about Silvia Moreno-Garcia. I have only read 2 books by this author. I read Mexican Gothic last year, which was excellent. Again, the atmosphere was everything. She is also a Latinx writer, and the culture that she brings into her writing is second to none. I also happened to read Untamed Shore, which is in fact not horror, but more of a like slow burn mystery noir is the best way that I can think to describe it. But again, the atmosphere that she writes is just so excellent. There are a number of her books that I am really looking forward to. I believe that she's in the process of re-releasing some of her older books, one of which being Certain Dark Things, which is super on my radar, but I don't believe that that will re-release until the end of the year. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. But she is an author that from that very first book, Mexican Gothic, just grabbed me, and I am really looking forward to consuming more of her work. Another author that I want to highlight is Chesya Burke. I have not had the pleasure of reading any of their writing yet. I do have this copy of Let's Play White. This is a short story collection. And the back reads, gritty and sublime, the stories of Let's Play White feature real people facing the worlds they're given, bringing out the best and the worst of what it means to be human. If you're ready to slip into someone else's skin for a while, then it's time to come play white. And there's also a blurb that says, these raw, brutal stories, often with intriguingly open endings, which I love, display an odd and unsettling relationship to the poetry of violence. These dark tales announce the arrival of a formidable new master of the macabre. So I am really looking forward to this. This is one that I see recommended really frequently. And you know, I love a good short story and I love open endings. So after reading the little back synopsis, like I want to push this one up a little bit further on my list. This was actually a gift from a subscriber. So thank you again. But yeah, really looking forward to this one. Next, I want to talk about Christina Henry, and this is another author where I have only had the pleasure of reading one of her books, but the genre that she writes really intrigues me. So Christina Henry, I read Alice by her, which is a different take on Alice in Wonderland. It is a horror take on Alice in Wonderland, and wow, it was brutal. There are snippets of the story that we know and love, but she really takes it and she turns it on its head and makes it incredibly horrifying. From my understanding, she seems to have taken several well-known fairy tales and turned them on their heads, and I am really looking forward to reading more of that. I am a huge fan of fairy tales in general, and I'm pretty sure most people know that actual fairy tales, like the real deal fairy tales, not the ones that Disney has commandeered and made them happily ever after, but the real deal fairy tales are actually very dark and disturbing. So I really love seeing retellings where people like take that and they run with it. I just think that that's really great. I can recommend Alice, but it is really intense. So just know that going into it. There is a lot of violence and a lot of gore, and I believe, if I remember correctly, there's also some sexual violence. So again, just be forewarned. But I still want to read more of her work. Another author that I want to talk about is Nalo Hopkinson. So I had the pleasure of reading her short story collection, Skinfolk. And that was such an interesting and thought-provoking collection. It's definitely more in the veins of sci-fi fantasy, but with a horror twist. It's a collection that has so much to say about gender and culture, and it was just gorgeously written. They were stories that were short that I had to, as I was reading them, I had to finish it and stop and go, and like really think about those. And they were beautifully written, but also horrifying in a lot of different ways. So I can say that I 100% recommend that collection and that you should definitely check it out. Alma Katsu is the next one on this list, and I read The Hunger. It was the first book that I read from her, which is a different take on the Donner Party and what might have actually happened. And again, the atmosphere in that book was delicious. I had a moment where I was like running across the parking lot of my old apartment complex because I was like, oh my God, there's something in the trees. Like, that's the vibe that it gave you, and it was just so good. I also read her series, The Taker trilogy. It may be called something else, but I really loved that series. It's like a different take on eternal beings. Definitely more of an urban fantasy versus a horror, but still 100% worth reading, and I highly, highly recommend her work. Can we have a conversation about women in horror and not talk about Miss Shirley Jackson? I don't think that we can. Haunting of Hill House is absolutely one of my favorite haunted house stories. I've loved various adaptations that have been made both on the big and small screen. The Netflix series holds a place in my heart, but I think that her writing style and just what she gave to the genre in general is something that we can't ignore. So just, I wanted to make sure that I mentioned her. Another writer I want to talk about is Helen Oyeyemi, and this book, Whitest for Witching, has been recommended to me like about, 8 million times. From my understanding, it is a haunted house story, and there's like elements of family secrets, and it sounds really excellent. I'm not 100% sure why I haven't picked it up. I did read a short story collection of hers, which I did really enjoy. She seems to be really adept at blending fantasy elements into something that is a little bit more twisted and horror. So I am really looking forward to this one. The short story collection, What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours, I did very much enjoy. I no longer have a copy of that, but I do recommend it. It's a very good sampling of her writing, and it did make me really excited to pick this one up. I also want to take a moment and mention Angela Carter. Angela Carter is kind of the queen of dark fairy tale retelling. She's very feminist, and if you haven't had the opportunity to pick up The Bloody Chamber, I highly encourage you to do so. I will caution you and say that while it's great in terms of gender and the things that it says about gender, there are some really gross racist things within those texts. It is one of those cases where this is a classically written work, and at that particular time, this was a thing. We can call it out and we can say that it's gross. But I think that she was one of the first women horror writers to really gain notoriety. And so I think that it's worth reading, at the very least, The Bloody Chamber. I have also read one of her other, I think it's more of a fantasy book than a horror, and I did not love it, but there's a couple other ones that I have on my radar that I want to read from her. So at this point, we have covered 12 authors, and I still have a whole list here. So I have just decided that this is just going to be part 1. This is Women in Horror Part 1. So we will definitely be doing a part 2. If there are any authors on this list that you have read and you loved, comment down below and let me know. If there are authors that you have to suggest that I had not included on this list, also comment down below and let me know. I'm always looking to read more women in horror. So hopefully you guys got some good recommendations out of that. There are tons of great books from these amazing authors. And again, just as a reminder, we should be reading women in horror all year long, and you should be reading Black authors all year long. So just remember that as you are curating your to be read lists. So that is all I have for you guys today. If this is your first time here, hi, hello, and welcome. I talk about books, I talk about horror, I talk about Stephen King, I talk about a lot of things. So if you like what you see and you want to see more, you can click thumbs up, you can hit subscribe if you haven't already, and you can also look in the down bar below to find links to all of my socials. You can find me on Twitter, Goodreads, and Instagram, as well as some links that will also give you different ways that you can support me if you so choose. As always, thank you guys so very much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye.